Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. Many times you've seen me talk about this statement where I say, if you want to go fast, you go alone. And if you and I elaborate from there. Today, I'm going to change that statement a little bit. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go faster, you bring your crew with you. And today's session is going to be with a crew that I've come to work with over the period of time, over a number of years, working not just on efficiencies and models that had to be deployed almost instantaneously, but working on programs that had to be run yesterday. Very quick, very efficient, responsive, proactive approaches to cybersecurity. Forewarned is forearmed, they say. And my group today that I'm going to be speaking to, my crew, is a crew that's always forearmed when it comes to the world of cybersecurity. Many of the people on this session today are not in need of any introduction, and I'm sure that in the next 60 minutes, not only will you get a very good sense of what is happening from a cybersecurity perspective in a very, very essential component of our Ontario but Canadian fabric, but you'll also get a brief peek into some of the key technical issues that are emerging, especially some very interesting insight into the world of access. I once did say, I connect, therefore I am. Well, what happens when you connect into a platform, and how is your identity and access managed in those kind of environments? My name is Ali Hirji. All of you know me as being a prof as well as a practitioner at Durham College, both in AI and cybersecurity. And I'm coming to you live from Oshawa. Both my guests today, rather, all three of my guests today are from across the city of Toronto. And I'm looking forward to engaging with Farooq, Alex, and Terry. Without any further ado, I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, but also asking them one particular interesting question. And Farooq, I'm going to start off with you. You are in no need of an introduction. You've been on every possible CyberX, Cyber Exchange event that I can think of. And I want to thank you for your continued commitment and for involving people like myself and grooming us and really caring for us and building the cybersecurity community, not just in Ontario, in Canada, but even globally. Farooq, of course, I'd like you to introduce yourself by saying your name, your title, but telling me one thing that really intrigues you about working as a cybersecurity professional in the higher education sector. Farooq?
Thank you, Ali, and thank you for an illustrious introduction. My name is Farooq Naiyer. I'm currently working as the Chief Information Security Officer for Orion. And for those of you who don't know about Orion, Orion is the research and education network for the province of Ontario, and is part of a global ecosystem of research and education networks. Apart from that, I'm also a shared CISO, virtual CISO, or a lead SME for a cybersecurity consortium, which goes by the name of Ontario Cybersecurity Higher Education Consortium, which is a consortium of about 16 colleges and 14 universities in Ontario. And we are also have a recent addition to our cohort. We now have 7 institutions from Nova Scotia who are part of our consortium also. So working closely with the higher education community for the past 3 years, 11 months and counting. So to your question, Ali, what interests me in terms of doing cybersecurity for higher education? I think the biggest thing is uh, collaboration. I think the way higher education in Canada collaborates is something which I've not seen in any other sector or segment. I mean, we collaborate naturally, we share information, we help each other out, we pool resources. I think that's something which you won't see in the corporate sector. So that's something which excites me, and that's something which has helped us grow this shared security services model in Ontario and beyond.
Fantastic. And I think that piece of collaboration is one that we want to touch upon because when we go into risks and we start talking about access, one of the things that you brought up during CISO Forum, you led a session on shadow IT. Who manages the controls and permissions, and how do you achieve some sort of standardization there? Really looking forward to that piece and how you've cracked the nut on collaboration. So, Farooq, as always, a pleasure to have you on board. Next, we're going to go to Alex. And Alex is not only a close friend, somebody who has started to collaborate with Durham College, doing some fascinating work in the world of security, and is also going to be, his team rather, is going to be keynoting at an autonomous vehicle conference being put together by a consortium led both by Durham College, Ontario Tech, and a number of other partners across Ontario. Alex has definitely shown himself to be an expert in the field, but more importantly than that, a very humble and caring individual who understands the people behind cybersecurity. Alex, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, a little bit about your firm, and tell us the meaning of the name behind your firm. Alex?
Thank you, Ali. Glad to be here. I'm Alex Poizner. I am one of the founders of Parabellyx Cybersecurity. We are a fairly small company here in Toronto, working mostly with Canadian companies, but we came to be in a very interesting time. This is the time where a lot of organizations are struggling with the paradigm shift, where they want to have their applications accessible anywhere from any device to any of their users across the world. And security sometimes struggles with those concepts. So we've created the company with the idea of delivering cybersecurity at the speed of business, being able to help organizations not just with the standard cybersecurity issues, but also with how to integrate cybersecurity with things such as cloud, such as software development security, which becomes very important right now, as we all heard about SolarWinds issue. With any issues where we're migrating our applications to the cloud, with the objective of making them more open to our employees, our customers, people across the world. The name Parabellyx, it comes from Latin. If you heard the expression, if you want peace, prepare for war, civis pacem parabellum, that's the expression. It's been attributed to Marcus Aurelius. However, we never know who originally said that, but it kind of resonated through generations. Napoleon used this, Bismarck used it. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, we believe that cybersecurity is not a technical issue. It's not about technology. It's really much like any military issue. It's about multiple things: geopolitics, people, of course, the tools as well. But tools are really secondary. So this is how we arrived at the name Parabellyx.
Fantastic. And you know what, your introduction really resonated with something that Farooq said at a session about 2 to 3 weeks ago, where he said, we often focus on IT without focusing on OT, operational technology. And I think you've really referenced that really well in your introduction and the rationale behind the name. I also think that with your background, which you have the little be prepared or get prepared or whatever you want to call it, I think the word prepared really resonates with this community. You know what we say, right? If you're failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And I think being prepared is an extremely important aspect in being proactive with your cybersecurity posture. So looking forward to this interaction with you. And once again, I do want to thank you for all of your support, not just to Durham College, but to the wider cybersecurity community as well. Speaking of support to the wider cybersecurity community as well, I know Parabellyx as well as Farooq have been very closely working with our friends at Humber College. Not only is it a pleasure to welcome them to the platform today and welcome them to the Power Hour, Terry, nice to be connected with you finally. I'd like you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your role, and tell us one thing about what you do that keeps you excited every day. Terry?
Sure. So my name is Terry Shipley. I'm the manager of IT security at Humber College. I've been in this position for a couple of years, but prior to that, I've worked for the college for 13 plus years. So I'm not new to the higher education vertical. We lead a small team, and of course, we collaborate with the OnCheck, and we've worked, as you mentioned, with Parabellyx before. So what keeps me excited to come to work? I think what's really interesting about security these days is kind of a shift in mentality. The no mentality is going away, and security is now being seen as an enabler rather than a blocker. So when we're talking about identity and things like that, I look forward to, taking advantage of those enabling features and really be able to enable the digital transformation at the institution.
Absolutely. And I think this piece on enabling digital transformation and understanding what do we mean from a technical standpoint with digital transformation, moving away from our traditional castle and moat-like environments to more flexible cloud environments, but understanding how these need to be provisioned, especially in light of work from home. So Terrence, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I want to thank you for joining, and I also want to thank all of you for bringing your own character and flavor to the introduction. Terrence, I also like the shirt, and we'll probably talk about that shirt when we go into the closing comments. Let's jump into today's topic for a little. First, I want to give you a little bit of a background into what's happening in the cybersecurity space, particularly in higher education. Now, for those of you who are watching on cyberexchange.ca, you'll see nice little ticker notes coming at the bottom. You'll see nice little images coming around while we are discussing things. Enjoy that, but I highly recommend you read this report by Orion, which Farooq had authored, which talks about the landscape as of 2020. Now, Farooq, you mentioned in that report that nearly 46% of higher education institutions in Canada have reported some form of a cyber incident as of 2020. A couple of days ago, a couple of institutions up north were in the news for a potential incident. We're seeing incidents happening not just in the urban locales, we're seeing them happening in some of our remote northern institutions as well. Farooq, let's start off with you. What's changing in the threat landscape as it applies to the higher education space?
So they often say that the cyber threat actors don't take time off. And I think what they have done is that they have taken that quite seriously. So in the past 10 to 11 months, they have stepped up their game for many reasons. I think given the fact that the more than 3/4 of the world is relying on the internet or in technology uh, to carry out their business, to or to connect with their friends and family, or to educate or something. So given the fact that there's been so much of reliance on the internet, that has come up as an avenue of a big opportunity for these cyber threat actors, and they have gone after all organizations who have played a critical role in providing connectivity, be it VPN service providers, be it cloud service providers. And what has happened is that since institutions are heavily relying on technology, uh, this means that if they are encountering any kind of an outage or an incident or a breach or a ransomware, they would have no choice but to give in to the demands of the cyber criminals. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the cyber criminals have now become even more stronger. They are working on the model of crowdsourcing. We heard about the whole Emotet fiasco, in which they had different silos who were supporting them. There was a huge crackdown by Europol, and the Canadian law enforcement also played a huge role in it. But I think the threat actors have evolved over time. The other thing is that given the fact that people in the healthcare sector and the higher education sector have fallen victims and have given in easily to the demands of the cyber criminals, has enabled them to go after organizations who are sitting on huge pools of data. Because I mean, the threat actors are after two key things: they're either after money or they are after your personal identifiable information. So that's the key reason.
Absolutely. And I want to work with this a little bit, Farooq, by bringing Terry into the conversation. Terry, we live in a very strange time where not only our kids talk back to us, but so too do our applications. Multiple applications coming onto your network, multiple types of research happening. In the college level, we're looking at applied research, we're looking at new models of conducting analysis, so on and so forth. Would you say that even the changing face of research, the changing face of ed tech is also contributing to the kind of attacks that we're seeing facing college institutions for that matter? Terry?
So personally at Humber, I don't think that's come to be an issue yet, but I do agree that as those repositories of data grow and the wealth of information and it becomes visible, that is going to be an additional target for those threat actors. And I lost my train of thought.
That's fine. Well, it's in those lost moments that we often find ourselves. But let me reshape that question just a little bit for you, Terry. True, as we're developing more and more data and we're gathering more and more data, Farooq talked about this during his Shadow IT session. Other folks have talked about the impact of gathering lots of data and not having good secure data practices. Are you seeing now that there's more emphasis, let's say at Humber, to do security awareness training programming to make sure that security is top of mind for everybody on campus?
Yes, there is definitely a drive to increase the understanding of security at the institution, ensuring that people know their roles and responsibilities, because security isn't about a security team. It is about a collective group of individuals with a shared responsibility for not only our students' data, but the institution's data, and ensuring that that data remains private.
Absolutely. And I think this piece about student data and research-based data also will lead to a question that is actually coming around insider threats and what motivates certain attacks. So I do want to get into this question. And Farooq, you during our Orion session, the on-check session that we did at CISO Forum, we spoke a lot about disgruntled employees, but disgruntled students as well. And I want to come to that a little bit more. So thank you, Terry, for shaping that important element around data. Alex, let's come to you. I've always been a proponent of the fact that simple is very complex. It may sound like it's a simple thing. Hey, we just need to make sure that we have enabled two-factor authentication, for example, on our application. Sounds simple, but it's very complex. For a firm like Parabellyx, when you look at the higher education space, to begin with, where do you start from and how do you start to support them from a security perspective? Alex?
Well, I think in any institution, not just academic institutions, but very important for academic institutions, is you don't really start with looking at one individual problem. You start realistically with the question, which is strategic question. What do you want? What do you want to achieve with cybersecurity? Because a lot of times we start going into projects, implementing technology, implementing processes, while we are not really going back to the fundamental objective of what we want to achieve. The thing is, any institution and academic institutions, they have a lot of things coming from the top. We call it grant strategy, right? It's something that's coming from non-technical people, and you may say, well, they don't understand cybersecurity. They may not understand the technicalities around cybersecurity, but they understand what they want to achieve with the cybersecurity force at hand.
Yeah.
So that's the first question that you're going to ask. What exactly you're trying to achieve? What are the objectives? Is what we are going to do for you going to somehow move you ahead in achieving those objectives?
Makes sense.
This is where you start. Now, you've also mentioned something about complexity, and you're absolutely right. The thing is, technology implementation usually assumes uniformity of things. It assumes that everything is the same across the board. However, it is not. We are finding that a lot of time, especially when dealing with human factor, there are more exceptions than rules, much like in the English language.
Absolutely.
So that's where you should start. Don't start at selecting technology. Start understanding the environment itself. Start understanding whether there are exceptions, how many exceptions. Maybe those exceptions actually would be the rule versus what we thought is the rule. So the analysis and preparation is as important as actually doing the execution.
Absolutely. And I think this preparation piece, again, that key word that you've been resonating with, prepared and preparation. I want to work with that a little bit more and again, bring Farooq into this conversation. Farooq, when you and I sort of started work together at Orion, and I was sort of learning under your footsteps on how to begin with cybersecurity assessments, you began with a cybersecurity assessment for each of the institutions. In the report that I read, you make mention of the fact that, not all cybersecurity roadmaps and assessments are that thorough and comprehensive. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've been strategizing with these assessments? Have you been doing them on an annual basis, quarterly basis? Are you automating it? I mean, you said this many times, you don't fear computers, you fear the lack of them. Are you using automation in that, or are you doing them on your own? Talk to us a little bit about how you're managing this colossal weight of multiple institutions and streamlining their security roadmaps and assessments.
Thank you, Ali. So a couple of things, and I think since you were there when we were starting off with the program, you know about the struggle and the whole thing. But I think we have come a long way We started off this project back in 2017 as just a pilot for about 8 institutions. We have now grown that to about 37 institutions. So in this journey, we have learned a lot. We have learned a lot. We have evolved our assessment model too. So just a couple of things. The approach that we had in mind when we started off the shared CISO project at Orion was that for me to be the advisor to the institutions and to provide them the right advice, I need to understand the lay of the land. I need to understand the threat landscape. I need to understand what their current state is. So the idea behind this assessment was that it should primarily be a self-assessment, so there is no bias from my side. The second thing is that this also provided us an opportunity to provide some kind of an awareness and guidance to institutions in terms of how they need to assess themselves, because everybody assesses themselves differently based on their perception and level of understanding and maturity. But I think initially, what we did was that we used a questionnaire, which was a combination of at least 3 to 4 frameworks like a NIST CSF, ISO 27001, and COBIT 5 had about 500 questions. We ran that exercise for a good 2 years, but we realized that 500 questions are a bit too much. And I think 2 years worth of data gave us a good idea about what the community is looking for and what should we be focusing on. So we have now evolved our assessment to be down to about 177 questions, and the community really appreciates that. I'm sure Terry was really happy with that, and his peers too. But the fact that we used a framework which is focusing on the top 20 critical security controls. So this enables organizations who are small in size just to focus on things which are critical and essential, and then start building on that. And it also helps make sure that the mature institutions are on track. The good news is that a majority of the institutions in Ontario are already using it. This assessment has this concept, and this assessment has inspired other provinces across Canada. So there are at least 2 to 3 provinces who would be following a similar approach. And yes, the plan is to take this assessment national. We're working closely with Canary on that. So on doing this mammoth of a task, what have we achieved so far, and how automation has played a role? So right now we're just playing around with uh, uh, the benefits and luxuries provided by MS Excel and a flavor of Power BI. But we are definitely working on probably having a tool or developing a custom tool in the future. We are having conversations with Canary on that. And for those of you who don't know about Canary, Canary is one of the players in the National Research and Education Network, NREN. So yeah, we have been in talks with them and other NREN partners, but there are plans of bringing some element of automation so that we can reduce the amount of workload over here. But I think I have a good team at Orion, which is helping me create all this, but it does take time, and at times we do run into delays, but yeah, the plan is to automate this.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the key points that you brought up, and this is that, and I've said this at other sessions, that one of the best times to fix the roof is when the sun is shining, right? So when there's you have to time these assessments very carefully. You've got to be cognizant also of the workload that our institutions are facing as well. Now, before we dive into one or two questions that have come in, thank you to everybody who's sending me the questions. You can send them to me on direct message or on live chat, and I'll make sure that I weave it in. Shout out to the team at Cyberx for making this super, super simple. I do want to jump into the nitty-gritty of access and access management that Alex was also flagging earlier on. But Terry, I want to bring you back into this conversation. These assessments ultimately, place a load on you. You've got to respond to them. You've got to take out the time. But more importantly than that, you've got to bring in input from other members of your team. And they may not necessarily be other members in information security. They might be people from an administrative standpoint, from a faculty standpoint. These assessments, A, how useful are they for you? But B, how do you manage to rally the troops to get the best possible output and responses? Terry?
Well, when we started our security program, I think collaboration was a key component of, our goal. So, bringing in the various resources required to fill in these assessments gives us an opportunity to have those conversations, to understand the various perspectives within the institution and being able to collect that information. So we use it as an opportunity to start those conversations. And then we say that it was Farooq's fault. It's not our fault that we're doing this, and they're fine with that. So it gives us an opportunity to start those conversations, and it's been a fantastic experience.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the key characteristics for those of you who get the chance to, if you go on demand, besides watching the session with Mark, Dylan, Alex, and myself, you can also watch a couple of sessions talking about some of the key characteristics of CISOs. And one of them is accountability and accepting blame and accepting responsibility. That is one of the fundamental reasons that I believe that the OnCheck program has been as successful as it is, because someone at the helm is bearing responsibility. And I cannot underestimate how important that piece is. Alex, let's bring you back into the conversation based on what you heard about security assessments and the makeup of the teams and the different responses that have to go into getting quality output. I want to put this question directly at you. Sitting on the outside, looking at academic institutions, would you say that the risk, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to get your perspective, is given how things have moved now from a physical campus to a virtual campus, would you say that this has brought to attention the issue of access and identity management to the table even more prominently? And B, what are some of the other risks that you're starting to see with this new model of the virtual campus? Alex?
That's a great question, Ali. I mean, from the risk perspective, academic institutions, they are interesting because they're in everybody's crosshair. I mean, Farooq and Terry talked about the risks coming from cyber criminals, and cyber criminals, they're out there to make money. And like Farooq said, there are two ways of making money, really. It's really business disruption and saying, pay us, so the business disruption is going to go away. Or we're going to get some personal information which we can make money on. But something more subtle is around the work that academic institutions are doing in research. And really, academic institutions is what powering Canadian economic engine. The research that goes in those institutions, we're often neglecting that aspect, but this is what keeps Canada going. This is what keeps Canada great. And a lot of geopolitical players, they understand this. So the research that academic institutions are doing is in their crosshairs. And it's not just the hard research of something that was already achieved. It's a soft research of understanding who is doing what academics are involved in what programs. It's the soft intelligence around how the whole research machine works in the country. So this is an additional research that this is an additional risk that everyone needs to consider. Now, as we moved out of our fortified walled castle and we moved online, we're saying now, well, most of people are not really in the building. They're somewhere else. They may be in their home. They may be somewhere else around the world. We don't know from what devices they're going to access the application that they need to access. So the whole security paradigm shifted to how do we protect that access, and there are really three things that are around it. Obviously, we're thinking about endpoint security, but endpoint security is something that is hard to achieve, especially in academic institutions where we do not try to manage devices for many people, including students, including a lot of the staff. We give them the freedom of using any device that is available to do their work. But in addition to this, there are two other aspects, right? There is an aspect of protecting the access itself, protecting the access to applications. And this is done both from the configuration management, but also from the application security perspective. And lastly, we're talking about identities. And identities are extremely important because depending on the situation, it's either endpoint or the identity itself that is going to be the low-hanging fruit for anybody that is trying to breach the academic institution for whatever purpose that is. And we are concentrated on the access, but we're not concentrated on how do we protect identities. In many cases, we don't even realize the whole surface area of that we require to cover to protect those identities, because the identities may be in multiple places, maybe some identity segmentation. In those cases, we really have to go back to the table and ask, is it really one identity? Are those multiple identities? Where those identities are used before we can go and even start looking at the access control. And obviously, there is also a question of the identity providers, where the identities are stored. Are we protecting those? Are those resilient against attacks? Are those resilient against failures? Because if they're not, you have a fundamental problem that can cause a huge disruption to the business in your organization.
Absolutely. And I think I want to work with this just a little bit more. A question that has come in, because you've really unpacked this aspect of, look, it's no longer that traditional piece of, we're utilizing our default Microsoft Active Directories and then storing identities there and managing password authentications and pushing people to applications. It really is a question of, okay, even once somebody has got into an application, what are they doing when they're on that application? And this is where we have to think about the intersection between AI and access. We have to think about some of the privacy issues that come with tracking activities as well on these applications. So there's a lot to unpack there. Farooq, let's go to you and then we'll come back to Terry. Farooq, the question that's come in is drawing from what Alex has just said. And it's a very straightforward, direct question, which I think is going to put you on the spot, but I know you're up to the task. And the question is, are the days of, and I'll read it actually verbatim for you, are the days of usernames and passwords numbered? Are we going to shift to a world with passwordless authentication? Farooq.
Short answer is yes, that's the practical way of moving forward and managing identities in a more secure way. So, I mean, there are already many organizations who are using privileged access management solutions, and such privileged access management solutions do allow for passwordless authentication. And do also come with all the other bells and whistles. But I think we need to have that, because I think given the fact that we have seen so many instances of password spray attacks and credential stuffing attacks in which people are end users have been reusing the same credentials with other services, and because of that they have other breaches which have taken place. So I think given the fact that such type of attacks are on the rise, we need to make sure that not just privileged access, but usual user access should have not just multi-factor authentication, but passwordless authentication and all those other things too. So.
Yeah, and I think this aspect of identity access management and privileged access management is one that we probably even want to do a separate session on altogether, because I think the two need to be understood very well. To our audience, in the link below, you're not only seeing, or sorry, in the ticker below, you're not only seeing data points, but you're also seeing references to different articles. Take a look at that. Farooq has also published quite a few pieces, which I'm happy to share with you, which also look at the fintech sector, the differences between magnetic stripes and the chip, so on and so forth. It's a huge, fascinating space. Biometrics is another one as well. So Alex, Terry, and Farooq, if we have the time sometime in the future, we should also be driving more into privileged access management and stuff like biometrics. Terry, let's come to you, and Farooq, thank you for that answer. The only constant is change. But you have to right now, given the situation that we find ourselves in, you do have to still make sure that people are practicing good password hygiene, so on and so forth. Are you seeing situations where now, to quote a question that has come in, people are experiencing password fatigue, where they're just going on with it and really nothing has happened, so they don't really follow some of the password rules that you've set? How are you making sure that people are staying, users on campus are staying on top of their passwords and are practicing good cyber hygiene? Are there ways in which you're pushing them and forcing them to make changes? Are you running campaigns and tests and awareness programs? Tell us a little bit on how you're ensuring that the community doesn't experience fatigue. Someone had to do it. You're on mute, Terry.
It was me. Yeah, so, passwords, obviously, we know have been dead for a long time. So A lot of technologies are stepping up to kind of replace or augment passwords. So we are implementing MFA, which, a lot of people think MFA, oh no, I got to do that extra step. But in reality, what they're finding is a better user experience. So, if you don't have to enter your password all the time, the likelihood of you entering it falsely is decreasing. So shifting the way in which we manage passwords and ensuring that we're communicating, going back to security awareness, making sure that we're communicating best practices on a regular basis, and just keeping people informed. Another huge component of passwords and the weaknesses of passwords is related to breaches. So now we're looking at communicating that information when it becomes available, so that they are informed when their passwords that they have reused across the environment have been breached, shifting the responsibility from IT to the individual.
Thank you for that. And shifting the responsibilities and then also helping with transitions into new models of service delivery. Alex, this is where your expertise comes back in again. And I do want to also make mention to the rest of the members of your team who are truly fascinating, folks like Manoj, Eric, etc., who have been really great in working closely with our teams. And I want to get your perspective and strengths back onto the table here. Alex, helping teams transition from your traditional authentication, the Active Directory-like environments, user ID, password, to more sophisticated models, which include privileged access. How do you approach that transition? How do you help them with making that transition smooth? And what are some of the checks and balances that you keep in place to ensure that these transitions are done in a controlled environment? Alex?
Thanks, Elaine. So, a couple of aspects that you really have to keep track when you are transitioning to various methods of authentication, when you're transitioning to privileged access management. First of all, you have to remember it's not about technology. Technology is a really small component of it. So it's all about the process. I mean, sometimes we find that due to certain conditions, users cannot have individual accounts. They need to have shared account for one reason or another. And oops, that just broke the entire design. So that's why those things have to be known in advance. This is where you really have to divide and conquer. It's not about an application. It's about use case. It's about how people use the application. It's about how they access the application. So you really have to break it down as per the human use cases rather than the technology use cases. Once you do it, obviously there are choices. Choice number one, we have to change the process. Choice number two, we have to change something in the technology. In many cases, changing the technology is really path of least resistance. I mean, especially when you're dealing with a large team of people that have been using specific process every day, you get into the situation where there is a lot of resistance, understandably. What you have to do is you cannot really just pick one over another. This is where risk analysis really comes in. And the risk analysis is around whether what people are doing as part of the process has any security risks. Is there any usability risks when we're changing something from the technology perspective? And the question is which risks are going to outweigh, and that's the ultimate decision that you have to make. This is not a subjective decision from experts. This is really where you apply numbers, and this is really where you would need to say that specific risks outweighs the benefits, or it outweighs other risks that we may have. So that's really one of the fundamental things. And ultimately, what you have to do is you have to break the entire transition to passwordless or privileged access management, or whatever project you are doing right now, into small pieces that are palatable, that are not going to run for a couple of years. Because what we've seen with a lot of organizations, especially large organizations, they are trying to do a big bang approach where they'll say, we're going to just take application A as POC. And great, they've done that POC. The application implementation of passwordless or implementation of privileged access management went smoothly. Perfect. So they're just saying, we have a list of other 900 applications. Let's go. And this is where they discovered that application B, C, and F have so many complex issues around the process that they simply stalled the whole implementation for another 2 years. So don't make this a mistake. Just go around use cases, go around processes rather than applications themselves. The human factor will always win.
Absolutely. And I think, you know what, we talk about this a lot in our college, especially when we talk about like security and practices and implementing new techniques is, don't expect it to be a smooth ride. And if it is too smooth, if you think being smooth is safe, then the second you face even a moment of challenge, it can be very fatal to your organization. And that reputation that you build over 10 years can come crumbling down in a day. So I totally get your point. You've got to be prepared for those unknowns. You've got to be comfortable with being a little uncomfortable. Speaking about these uncomfortable topics, when it comes to access management, Farooq, this is one which I feel is coming from an academic standpoint, but is so pertinent to the higher education space. And that is about how can identity access management and good identity access management practices help in the classroom itself? Does it have a role, for example, especially with online delivery, can it have a role in ensuring, for example, that plagiarism is not happening, that cheating is not happening? Can this play a role in academic integrity? Farooq?
So I think I would like to approach this from the people aspect. Let's just forget the technology aspect, because I think from the technology point of view, this is something which is a no-brainer. I think it would definitely sell. The challenge that we have seen in the past few months is the pushback from the students and from the faculty. So I think just in terms of adding new pieces of technology or enablement has seen a pretty varied uh, response from the audience. So I think over here there are two things which would play a really important role. One is managing organizational change management effectively, and the second thing is the communication piece. One of the things which I want to pick up on is something which Humber College is doing. I think their comms team is playing a very important role in the rollout of multi-factor authentication. So if you have your comms team, which is making sure that from the messaging point of view, they have taken care of the whole transition, because see, transition, especially during pandemic, is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I mean, there's so many factors which are unaccounted for. The second thing is that many students and many faculty members had quite often during the pandemic raised concerns around privacy. So such concerns need to be addressed, even if they are concerns which are supposed to be concerns, they still need to be addressed. Okay, and then you're also dealing with unionized employees too. Right? There are lots of faculty members who are unionized. So I think if the communication piece and the change management piece is managed appropriately, and then if you have amongst the user management team, if you have champions who are going to be enabling this whole process, because you need to make sure that if you're driving change, you need to have champions on both the sides, not just on the implementation side, but from the user end side. And we need to take into account the entire user experience too, and all that. Because I mean, let's just say that there are many students out there who are not appreciative of the fact that they have to take classes through their laptops or their iPads, right? And all that. There are concerns on submitting assignments too, like you said, plagiarism and all those things. But there are also concerns around online assessments.
Yep.
And all those things. And of course, some incidents and breaches in the past of some leading proctoring solutions have not helped the conversation in any way. So I think we need to take all those things into account, and making sure that the organization takes all of these stakeholders along in this journey. That's very important.
Absolutely, and I'm definitely going to contradict what I said at the start. Yes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But the real statement is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And this is a good example of when you want to go far, how to come together. Two more questions have come in, and we've got about 12 minutes left. I'm going to weave them in. Terrence, I'm going to put you on hold for another, let's say, minute or two, and I'm going to come back to Alex because this question, I feel, definitely puts you on the spot and the hot seat. And I know you're up to the task. Alex, I'll read it verbatim. Are you suggesting that with the new methods of identity access management, privileged access management, multi-factor, MFA, is the goal here to move liability away from the institution to the user? Alex, your thoughts?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's not about liability. It's about giving freedom to the user.
Mhm.
I mean, before that, it's all about what you know. Hey, how many passwords can you remember? This is really user liability. You have to remember X amount of passwords. No, don't write them down. Try to keep them all in the head, or well, if you're lucky, we're going to give you an application to manage passwords. Now, the user actually has freedom, right? We can talk about something, still something that you know, but we can segment it into, for example, like Microsoft did with Windows Hello, pins to individual computers, so you don't have to enter the password anymore. Right. And that pin is only for specific machines, so the risk of a compromise is much smaller. Things such as multi-factor authentication, where it's no longer about getting 6 or 8 numbers and entering them. It's basically going to your phone and going into authenticator application saying, I approve. That's it. Or freedom to use biometrics. So I disagree. This does not push the identity protection liability to user. It actually gives freedom to user while giving the organization better tools to do their job in protecting the identity.
Absolutely. You know what they say, right? Eyesight is blind or eyesight is useless if insight is blind. And I think in this case, it's not a question, as you mentioned, about liability. It's really a question about democratizing access and freedom of access and empowerment. I do appreciate the question, though, because it does, in the fintech space, one could make the argument that when you think of it from a merchant's perspective, there is that aspect of liability, especially with cash transactions happening every second. So thank you for that, Alex. And I do appreciate you not swaying away from the question and addressing it head on. Terry, let's bring you back into the conversation. And again, this is a question which I'll reword just a little bit. So apologies to the sender, but this has to do with delivery of applications and access. But given the fact that a lot of students right now may not even be in Canada, a lot of our college communities are blessed to have a very strong international representation. And because of the changes in flights and access, so on and so forth, physically into the country, many folks are accessing their classes remotely from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from the Middle East, from South Asia, from Africa. How has this impacted your security posture and how you're managing access into your applications? Terry?
Being in higher education, I think we've always dealt with a certain degree of personal devices, whether they be in Latin America or whether they be in Canada. I think, you know, understanding that our environment has always been, or our customer base has always been a global customer base. We've always treated individuals as being external to the organization. So we had that kind of knowledge previously. So we had a lot of the infrastructure set up in such a way that the external was external. So and that included wireless on premise. So we were lucky in that way, but you know, it's still yet to see from a performance perspective if that's going to impact the ability of the student to take advantage of our services. And I see that being more of a challenge than, you know, the security, because just moving a device to a different location doesn't necessarily change the security posture of that device. It just changes the location.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes you have to break it down to your past experiences and draw from that. Definitely is a complex task when you have users coming in from multiple countries. But if you've already been used to that, to the idea of multiple devices, it really is just about shifting your canvas just a little bit more. So Terry, thank you for that. And I would argue that, you know, institutions like yours have been well prepared for this because you also do a lot of international outreach and international programming. as well. So it's ingrained within our fabric. We have another 7 more minutes, and Farooq, a question for you, and then we'll come towards sort of closing comments. Farooq, this is a statement that you and I have agreed to on many times, that the gate is useless if the walls have holes in them. And that's the aspect of insider threats. You've mentioned this quite a bit, that we have to be sensitive to the fact that right now, given budget constraints, some employees may get furloughed, some folks may not get contract faculty, for example, may not get as many classes. They may still retain their credentials, but they're not employed at the same levels, and this can generate some forms of dissatisfaction. Have you seen a shift now in the amount of insider threats and the concerns around it, especially in view of the pandemic?
I think based on what I've heard and observed so far, I think we have seen an increase in insider threat. And one of the things that we also need to understand is that insider threat has got two aspects to it. One is negligence. And negligence also has two categories. One is innocent negligence, the other one is criminal negligence. And then there's a thing called oversight. And then there's a thing which is, and the third aspect, there's a third aspect to it also, which is deliberate action. I mean, so you're deliberately committing an act just to disrupt something or just show your frustration at something. So you have seen an increase in that.
Absolutely. And I think this is, this piece of the human side of it. This comes back to aspects around how access is managed and how it's distributed in terms of controls. And Alex, will bring you in for some very quick commentary on this. Alex, how do you manage, for example, the rules around access? You can automate it to say that someone's contract runs from 2020 to 2021, and after this date, it has to be disbanded. What are some tips and tricks that you can share with the community on how better to manage and regulate their access management policies?
Thanks, Ali. So one of the things that I want to say here, the simplicity goes a long way. I mean, we tend to create as many access roles, access templates as possible because we want it to be customized, we want it to be tight. In the end, my suggestion is actually simplify the number of access templates. Make sure that you are at the manageable level. I mean, if you look, for example, at how the cloud services providers want you to manage the environment, it's all about those templates. It's about creating the minimal amount of role templates that you can run with. But that extends beyond cloud, that extends everywhere. You really need to have a minimal set of role templates, the minimal set of access templates to be able to manage them in an effective manner. Otherwise, you basically stuck with a huge complexity, a huge number of templates, which sometimes you don't even know which one is the right one to apply anymore. Yeah. So that's one very important aspect of access management. But obviously, as you move to the templated access management, there are a lot of things that you can automate. This is exactly what a lot of our clients are doing with our help. You can automate the application of specific templates or roles, even on demand, if somebody needs an extended access for a very specific operation. You can create automatically some monitoring rules or access rules based on a template that is being assigned. I mean, as soon as you move into this templated approach, a lot of things all of a sudden are in the technology realm, and automation plays a huge part in there. Basically, you are making the entire operation of identity access management easier to run with this approach.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, we only have about a minute and a half left, but and there were a few more questions that have also come in around biometrics, a couple of questions that have also come in around analytics when it comes to access. So my promise to the community is that while we're going into Canadian Women in Cyber, we do have one more power hour with Parabellyx, and I think we're going to focus now a little bit deeper on this aspect of what does biometrics mean to you? What does it mean when you use your biometrics to access an application? What does it mean when you actually pay to get your books from campus, so on and so forth? So really thank you, Alex, Farooq, and Terry, for unpacking this a little bit more. As we come to a bit of a smooth landing, I always want to get our audience to know a little bit about our guests. So we'll conclude with some very light remarks. And Terry, we'll start with you. Terry, besides the interesting shirt that you have on, tell us about a book or a movie that inspires you and also sort of guides your practice in cybersecurity. Terry, 30 seconds.
So I won't talk about a book or a movie, but I talk about a podcast that I listen to on the regular, and that's Darknet Diaries, really telling the history of cybersecurity and really understanding where everything evolved from. Really interesting stories. That's it.
Absolutely. And Darknet Diaries, for those of you who don't know about it, I'll post a link on cyberexchange.ca. Highly, highly recommend it. In fact, there's someone from the Cyber Exchange Advisory on the Beyond Borders conference. Her name is Sivan, and she does some pretty interesting podcasts as well. She's from Tel Aviv, works out of New York. Highly recommend that as well to you. Mr. Farooq, my mentor, really good friend, somebody who I accredit with introducing me to this space and guiding me through my progress. Farooq, a book or a movie that inspires you and you think can shape the future of cybersecurity in Canada?
The book by Edward Snowden, Permanent Record. So I had the privilege of speaking at the Higher Ed conference in 2019 alongside Don Lavisa. And I had the privilege of conducting a session right before the keynote, which was by Ed Snowden. So I got a signed copy, and he has sent the signed copy from Russia, not from Canada or the US, because he's taken refuge over there. But that book touches on some really important aspects. And I think the thing which Edward Snowden really emphasizes in that book and in that session also was that privacy is part of your basic human right. Don't let it go. Don't give it away that easily. So yeah, and we are privileged to be living in a country where privacy is taken really seriously. So I think that book has really inspired me, and the various aspects of that book, which actually made me think a lot that why is privacy that important? Why is it considered a basic human right? So yeah, that book by Ed Snowden is something which really strikes me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Privacy is a right, not a privilege. And Mr. Alex, closing comments to you, a book or a movie that inspires you, sir?
Well, a couple of books, certainly. One of the first books that inspired me in my cybersecurity career was Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. And this really made me look at the risk analysis and risk quantification in a different way. But another book that really inspired me, and this is a book on strategy by Little Hart. It's a really military strategy book, and it's called Strategy. But it has a lot of aspects that are good for security leaders to know from the perspective of indirect strategy, especially when you have limited capacity, limited team, limited budget. What can you do from the indirect strategy perspective to still solve the issues?
Fantastic. Links and outreach to links and sort of basically more details on these books and these recommendations will be posted on cyberexchange.ca to my panelists. I'm going to ask you to wait for at least another 30 seconds so we can debrief for 30 seconds in the green room. But to our audience, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you, Farooq, Alex, and Terry. And if there's one thing that I've learned today, that is, look, when I go back to everything that Farooq has spoken about, Alex, etc., it starts off with an idea. And in many cases, these ideas have been unknown to a lot of folks. I know when we started the OnCheck program, the idea looked very dangerous to many people. But if an idea is not dangerous, it really is not worth calling an idea, because you do have to ruffle some feathers and you have to surround yourself with the right crew to go far, fast, and together. Thank you very much for joining in today. The next Power Hour is a very special one. Not like this wasn't, but this was special. But another special Power Hour that's going to be coming to you is on Tuesday with Eric O'Neill, and all of you know who Eric O'Neill is. Thank you to VMware Carbon Black for sponsoring that session. I'll see you all next Tuesday. Have a safe and a happy weekend. And if I don't see you at the Power Hour, I know I'm going to be seeing you at the Canadian Women in Cybersecurity Conference, where again, you'll get to hear more from many of our guests, including our friends from Parabellyx. Take care, stay safe, stay healthy.